He sat in the far corner of the huge conference room, silently watching the proceedings. His suit was expensive, his shoes were perfectly polished, but his face was in shadow. The atmosphere in the room thickened as the CEO of the company walked in, barely looking at the stranger, and immediately launched into his presentation. Every word he said hit like a hammer, unceremonious, rude, and seemingly designed to humiliate this man no one really knew. "This man is here by chance," the director began, looking coldly at him. "There are no successes like him in our world. He is a nobody, and that will not change." What the CEO didn't know was that sitting in front of him was one of the most powerful men in the world, a billionaire worth more than most of the people in this room combined. He could destroy this business with one phone call, but now he was silent, and every second of silence increased the tension until everyone in the room began to sense that something was wrong. Very wrong. Now, let's stop for a minute. Friends, write in the comments what your name is and where you watch us from. You are incredibly important to us. Each of you helps move our channel forward. Your likes, comments and subscriptions make our content better every day. We truly appreciate each of you. Remember that it is thanks to you that we continue to grow. Enjoy watching. The room was cold, as if the air were filled with icy contempt. The glossy table in the center of the room reflected the artificial light, casting unnatural reflections on the walls. Around the table, on leather chairs, sat serious men in expensive suits, clearly confident in their position and status. The front door opened quietly, admitting a man whose presence was barely noticed, but who would change the whole game. He was a dark-skinned man. His calm posture and impeccable black suit gave him an unshakable appearance, but something in his eyes said that he was accustomed to this kind of reception, to indifference, to silent prejudice. As he sat down on the edge of the table, someone in the room snorted loudly, as if his presence was not only unexpected but also irritating. Before he could sit down, the CEO burst into the room, a man with a strutting gait, wearing a gray suit, and with the arrogance of someone who was used to impunity. He immediately glanced around the room, and when he spotted the black man, he grinned. There was more to his eyes than just contempt, it was racism, deeply ingrained and not at all hidden. "Well, let's get started," he began, not even greeting the stranger. "But before we get into serious matters, let's just define what kind of, well, some people," he glanced at his guest, "are doing in this room. I'm not used to having people here who will never contribute anything to our company. Seriously, what is this guy doing here?" There was laughter in the room. Some looked down modestly, trying to ignore what was happening, but most remained silent, not daring to intervene. Everyone understood perfectly well that there was something more behind this humiliation, a system deeply embedded in their consciousness and culture. They saw him as an outsider, a stranger, a person whose presence did not fit into their ideas about who was worthy of being here. The CEO continued with even more pleasure, feeling that he had succeeded in establishing authority in the room. "I'll tell you this, if you want to have even the slightest chance of making a contribution to this company, you need to at least look like you're part of this team. You, my friend, are clearly a long way from that." The man to whom these words were addressed sat motionless. He stared straight ahead, his face impassive, but his eyes were icy, cold and unwavering. No one in the room knew that he was one of the richest men in the world, that his name was on the Forbes list, that his investments could change the fate of more than one corporation, and no one guessed that this man had known humiliations far worse than this, and that they had made him strong. But the director apparently decided not to stop. "You know, I always said, if you're black, you have to work twice as hard to be half as successful, but in some cases, even that doesn't help. Here's our new example. I don't even know where you came from, but you're clearly not from the circle where success is achieved." An awkward silence fell over the room. Some of those present were beginning to feel uncomfortable, realizing that the director had gone too far, but no one dared to utter a word in defense of the stranger. Power and fear ruled them. At that moment, the dark-skinned man quietly placed his hands on the table and slowly looked up. There was absolute silence in the room. It seemed that every sound had died down as he opened his mouth, but had not yet spoken a word. His voice was even and deep, and every word he spoke penetrated the souls of those sitting in the room. "Are you sure you know who you're talking to?" His voice didn't shake. It wasn't harsh, but there was a threat in it, subtle as an undercurrent that could capsize a ship. The director froze. He clearly hadn't expected such a reaction. He thought he'd already put the stranger in his place, that the humiliation was complete, but the man continued, and his words were like blows to the director's fragile pride. "You may not realize who I am," he continued, leaning forward slightly, "but you will soon, and believe me, I don't have to prove to you or anyone else that I deserve to be in this room. My presence alone confirms it." The room froze, the tension almost unbearable. The seconds dragged on painfully long, until silence hung over the assembled group like a dark cloud. The silence in the room felt oppressive, as if every breath was strained by the weight of hostility and uncertainty. The CEO, who had just reigned in his arrogance, suddenly felt his confidence slipping, his face contorted with irritation, and he tried to seize control of the situation. "You know, we have rules, and not everyone can fit into them. I hope you understand that your job in this business is not just a numbers game. It's a game with real people. People who not only have a better education, but the right skin color to be here," he said, turning up the heat. The black billionaire, who had remained calm until this point, began to rise from his chair. His face showed not only strength but also deep sadness that such prejudiced people still existed in the 21st century. He knew that racism was not only ingrained in society but was becoming part of corporate culture, poisoning minds and hearts. As if white is the only color that matters. "I'm not going to let you insult me or my story because I know that I stand on the shoulders of not just myself, but all those who fought for equal rights and opportunities. I'm not here to make excuses, but to remind you that the world is changing, and people like you won't define who has the right to succeed." Silence reigned in the room once more. No smiles flickered on the faces of the employees anymore. All of them were now riveted to what was happening. The secretaries standing by the door exchanged surprised glances, and some of the men, once confident, began to whisper among themselves, anxiously awaiting their boss's response. The CEO, realizing he was losing control of the situation, decided to attack head-on. "I've always said that vigilance is the best way to deal with people like you. If you want to talk about equality, I'll say this: equality doesn't mean that everyone can come and sit at this table. It means that those who deserve it have the right to it. And if I were you, I'd remember that this business works for people with the right values." "The right values?" The billionaire's voice rose. "Are they the values that make you look good to others? The values that make you feel comfortable putting down those who are different? I worked with people who saw me as a person, not the color of my skin. I succeeded despite your preconceived notions, and it wasn't an easy road. But I'm here to remind you, real success isn't about winking at your privileged company. It's about lifting others up." Now the tension in the room was at a breaking point. Some people started exchanging glances, realizing that their boss had simply crossed a line. Groups of employees who had been silent until now were now exchanging thoughts about how blatant disrespect and racism had become part of their culture. They realized that this wasn't just a conversation about business, it was a conversation about life, about rights, and about the importance of speaking up. The CEO, increasingly embittered, issued a final challenge: "I will not allow this business to be a place where this kind of talk is the norm. I will not listen to you trying to upend everything we've built here. This is a place for winners, not losers to begin with." For a moment, everyone froze, but then the billionaire stood up completely. He was not going to take any more humiliation. "You are wrong. I did not lose. I stood firm, and the true winner here is looking at you now. I did not come here for permission or approval. I came to remind you that we are not going to remain silent any longer. We will fight for our rights, and soon people like you will realize that the time for change has come." The CEO, realizing that he had no more arguments, only snorted in frustration, but realized that his attempts to humiliate had not brought the expected result. Those present began to discuss among themselves. Someone quietly whispered. Someone nodded disapprovingly in the direction of the billionaire. "We'll see how far this conversation goes when there are no more people in the room willing to endure humiliation," he said, his voice shaking with the emotion he was trying to hide. In that moment, something more than just two people colliding was happening. It was a battle for dignity, for the right to be heard in a world that had for too long silenced the voices of those who differed from the conventional image of success. In that moment, everyone in the room knew that this was just the beginning of a new era where equality and respect would not be just empty words. The billionaire's words hung in the air like a thundercloud ready to burst into a storm. The CEO, feeling the ground slipping from under his feet, tried to maintain some illusion of control. He glanced around the room. expecting someone to back him up. Instead, he saw only frightened and confused faces ready to switch sides. Do you think that your wealth and success can protect you from reality? The director continued, trying to regain his arrogance. Everyone in this room knows that we have rules, and you, as a new player, must abide by them. Otherwise, you will simply be thrown to the sidelines. I have already heard about your attempts to take control of some projects, but let me remind you that our doors are not open to everyone. The billionaire stepped forward slowly, cutting off the stream of humiliation. He looked the CEO straight in the eye, and there was more than anger in his gaze, there was determination. I didn't come here to ask you for anything. I came here to remind you that I am capable of building my own business without relying on your network of privilege, and I will do it despite you and your system. The room fell silent again. Each person felt the tension building, creating an explosive atmosphere. Some who had once looked down on the billionaire were now beginning to question their own views. Questions of bias and racism that had once been mere whispers in their minds were beginning to surface. The CEO, unwilling to give in, took up the words. You can talk about your success, but you will never understand how this business works if you act the way you do. Success is not just about money, it is about networking and being in the right place at the right time, and you will never be our equal in that. The billionaire clenched his fists but remained unfazed. He knew that the fight he was waging was not just for himself, but for all those who suffered from the same bias. Your connections don't make you great, they only highlight your weakness. True strength comes from accepting people as they are and creating opportunities, not squeezing them into your preconceived notions. The words were a challenge, and this time they were heard. Some began to whisper among themselves, exchanging glances full of understanding and support. A courage was beginning to emerge that could change the situation. The CEO, realizing he was losing control, challenged again. If you think you can change anything with empty words, you are sadly mistaken. This is a business that operates by its own rules, and I will not allow you to create chaos. The billionaire just chuckled. Chaos is what you call your system. I'm not going to fit into your framework. I'm going to make my own rules, and they're going to be based on respect, equality, and opportunity for everyone. It doesn't matter who you are or what color your skin is, your success will depend on you alone. Some of those present began to nod, showing agreement, but the director, not wanting to give in, tried to bring the situation back under control. You should know that in our world, your opinion does not matter. Here, we set the rules, and we are the ones who determine who will have the opportunity to succeed. This time, the billionaire didn't just talk, he acted. He turned to the crowd, addressing them, not the CEO. Friends, look at this. We are not here to let anyone bring us to our knees. We are here to grow, to support each other, and to make the world a better place. It's time we no longer remain silent and let anyone put us down just because we are different. His words were like sparks in a dry forest. Applause began to break out in the hall. People who had not had the courage to speak out before now began to support him. This was not just a rebellion, it was a movement. The eyes of those present lit up with hope and determination. They felt that this was their moment. The CEO, realizing his power was crumbling, threw up his hands. It's no use. You think you can change our attitude? You're just a temporary phenomenon. In the end, you won't be part of our company, he shouted, but his words no longer had the same force as before. The billionaire, feeling supported, returned to him with a cold smile. I may not be part of your business, but I will be part of something bigger. I will not be humiliated, and I will not let you control my future. This is not just my fight, it is the fight of all those who have ever suffered from bias. I am not alone, and today I show that we are all in this together. Despite your attempts to divide us, there was a tense silence as the billionaire turned and addressed the crowd. I will fight for equality, for your rights, for the opportunities you deserve, and I will not back down. His words sounded like an oath, and at that moment everyone present understood that this was not just the struggle of one person, it was the struggle of the entire community. The excitement in the room was growing, like a wave ready to sweep away everything in its path. The foundations on which the CEO's power rested began to crack. People who had once sat quietly, their eyes downcast, now looked forward boldly, full of determination and inspiration. Everyone felt that this moment could be a turning point in their lives. The CEO, noticing the change in the atmosphere, gripped the edge of the table in anger, as if it were the last bastion of his control. You're all just toys in this game. Do you really think you can just throw off the chains I've put on you? I've put years into building this company, and you still don't understand who you're dealing with." But the billionaire, unwilling to back down, stepped closer. His voice became louder and more confident. "You are wrong. You did not create this company, and you do not determine its future. We are the future. Each of us came here not to be controlled, but to change the world. We created this company together, and the time has come for each of us to have a voice." As if on cue, those present began to rise from their seats. The applause grew louder and louder, and now no one was hiding their emotions. Women and men who had previously been mere observers were now part of the movement that had emerged at that moment. The CEO, realizing his power was slipping away, began to thrash about. "You need to know your place. You just don't understand that every word you say will come with a price. I won't let you destroy what I've built." The billionaire stood there, not letting his enemy lose control. He knew this moment wasn't just for him, it was for everyone who had ever experienced humiliation and bias. "This isn't just your company, it's our company, and if you can't figure that out, then it's time for a new leadership. I'm not afraid to say it, and no one else should be." The hall filled with cries of support, and every word of the billionaire became not just his manifesto, but a cry for equality, for the rights of every person. People began to hug, exchange glances full of determination. It was a moment of unity. The CEO, finally realizing that his position was unsustainable, tried to regain control of the situation. He addressed those present. "You all know that there are rules here, and if any of you cannot follow them, you have no place in our company. I will defend our culture and traditions." "What culture?" the billionaire interrupted sharply. "A culture of prejudice? A culture of fear and inequality? If that's what you call tradition, it's time to destroy it. We can create a new future where everyone is heard and valued for their merits, not the color of their skin." There was another silence, but this time there was no fear in it, only determination. Those present began to chant in unison, "Enough! Enough!" The CEO, unsure how to react, began to panic. He looked around, confusion etched on his face. Secretaries, managers, and employees all began to retreat from him, forming a circle of support around the billionaire. "You want to know what real culture is?" the billionaire continued. "It's respect for every person. It's opportunity for everyone. It's a desire to make the world a better place. It's the ability to look each other in the eye and say we are one despite our differences. And that's what I'm going to instill in our business, one way or another." The CEO, no longer able to contain himself, jumped to his feet. "I will not let this happen. I will fight for what I believe is right. Do you still not understand that your time has come?" "Your time is over," the billionaire replied with a confident smile. "And now we are not on the same side, but this is not a war. This is our future. This is an opportunity that we will create together, and I will not humiliate you. As you have humiliated me and many others, I offer you the opportunity to change your position, to become part of the change, and not an obstacle to it." Some of the employees began to look at each other, realizing that they were truly on the verge of something great. Each of them knew that if they let this moment slip away, they would never see another chance to change. At this point, the billionaire stepped forward, ignoring the director's anger. "We can create a new structure based on equality and mutual understanding, and if any of you are ready to accept this, let's do it together." The room filled with applause again. It wasn't just approval, it was a wave of support that swept through everything that remained of the old system. People began to stand up and come forward, hugging each other, ready to claim their right to participate in the new future. The CEO, alone with his hatred and fears, felt his world crumbling. He realized that his attempts to maintain power were only increasing the resistance. He was clearly in the minority, and now this feeling was becoming more and more unbearable. The billionaire, seeing how his words were reaching people's hearts, continued, "We all know that equality is not just a slogan, it's a path. We can create a culture where everyone is valued. Let's get rid of fear and bias together. Create a business that reflects our diversity and strengths, not weaknesses." At that moment, something changed in the atmosphere. People began to realize that they could now speak up, that they could be heard. Each of them became part of something more meaningful than just a job. They became part of a movement that could change their lives. The CEO, realizing that his power was slipping away, felt anger and fear intertwine. He stepped forward, his face contorted with anger. "You think you can just come and destroy what I built? You're no different from those who do nothing but complain about life. Your story is just an attempt to justify your incompetence." The billionaire, sensing the tension, didn't back down. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to show that your methods are outdated. Your time has passed, and I'm not going to remain silent while you use your status to humiliate others. The CEO rolled his eyes, as if trying to make everyone believe he wasn't afraid. You're just a temporary guest in this room. I'm the one who runs this business, and if you don't like the way I do things, you can leave, but know this, you'll pay for every word you say. Pay? The billionaire laughed, his voice loud and clear. Are you threatening me? As if that will change anything? I have faced threats and prejudice many times before. I have learned to stand on my own 2 feet, and I will not be intimidated by your arrogance. You can try to humiliate me, but your time is running out. The tension in the room grew again. Some employees began exchanging glances, realizing that this was not just a verbal spat, this was a real conflict that could change everything. The CEO, realizing that his opponent was not going to back down, became even more aggressive. I'm warning you, you can't just come in and change the rules of the game when you don't understand how it works. You need to know that you are not on equal terms with me. I am the one who is the boss here. His voice shook with rage. The billionaire, unwilling to give in, stepped closer, their gazes meeting with a spark of anger. You think your status makes you invulnerable? Let me remind you, your power is based on fear and prejudice, and when those foundations begin to crack, your entire world collapses. I am not afraid of you, and I am not afraid of your threats. The CEO, no longer able to control his emotions, raised his voice sharply. You will be held accountable for your words. I can make you lose everything. Do you think your wealth will protect you? It only highlights how vulnerable you are. At this point, the room began to murmur. People began to whisper, some of them already realizing that the CEO was losing his power. The excitement was growing, and the billionaire seized the moment. You say it yourself, but in reality, you are the one who is afraid of change, afraid that you will not be in this new world. I am here to say, we are not going to listen to you. We are creating our future, and you are not needed in it. The CEO, seeing that support was slipping away from him, clenched his fists. You can't just come in and destroy everything I've built. I've put my life into this company, and you think you can take it away? This isn't just a job. This is my life. Your life is a system of oppression. The billionaire responded. You didn't create this place. You just used it to oppress others. I've come to restore this business to its true meaning, to create space for growth and opportunity for everyone, and I'm not going to let you destroy it. A storm of emotion erupted in the room. The applause broke out again, and people stood up to support the billionaire. They began to realize that this was not just a fight for justice, it was a fight for their future. The CEO, out of argument, finally said, if you think you can take control of this place, you are sadly mistaken. I will not allow that to happen, and if that means removing you by force, so be it. By force? So you're going to resort to threats? The billionaire asked with a smirk. Don't you understand that these very threats only highlight your weakness? You've already lost power, and now your only way to save face is to try to intimidate me and those who stand behind me. But I'm not alone. We are all together, and this is our time. As if on cue, the employees began clapping their hands in support of the billionaire, and the atmosphere in the room became tense. The CEO, seeing his position becoming increasingly vulnerable, just looked at them with irritation. He was surrounded, and now he knew that his reign was truly under threat. Don't forget, I'm still your boss, he shouted, but his voice was no longer as confident. I can fire you all. The billionaire, keeping his cool, replied, that's exactly what you're doing. You're firing the very idea of equality and fairness. But we have power, the power of community, and it's stronger than your threat. So choose, either you come with us, or you stay in the past, where you belong. The room erupted in applause and cheers, and the billionaire felt his words gain real power. He knew that at that moment, he was not the only one fighting for his ideals. He was leading all those who had ever experienced prejudice and inequality. The CEO, seeing that his time was running out, tried to make a last effort. You think that your time is over? I am not going to give up so easily. You think that because you are here, you have the right to everything, but I will disappoint you. We will see who wins this battle. Yes, we will see who wins, the billionaire answered confidently, but I already see that we are moving towards victory, and you will not be able to take back the power that is slipping away from you. We will not allow you to humiliate us any longer. This is our hour. The conflict had reached its peak, and the tension had become unbearable. Everyone in the room understood that not only the fate of the company was being decided, but also the fate of each of them. It was time for change, and the billionaire was not going to stop. The atmosphere in the room was tense and growing more tense with each passing second. People watched with bated breath as the conflict unfolded before their eyes. The CEO, realizing that his authority was crumbling, was pacing hysterically, his words becoming increasingly aggressive. "All of you who support him are nothing but weaklings. Are you ready to give in to this cocky new guy? He doesn't know how business works and will only get in our way," he shouted, pointing at the billionaire who stood there with an unwavering face. The billionaire, unwilling to back down, looked at those present, as if calling for their support. "Weakness is not in accepting change. Weakness is in fearing it. We are here to create a new path where everyone is heard. I am ready to fight for this, and I hope you are too." Some of the staff began to nod, which gave him more confidence. The CEO, feeling his support slipping away, shouted furiously, "I'm warning you all, if you decide to side with him, you'll be disappointed. I'll make sure you have nowhere to go." "You will be disappointed," the billionaire replied, his voice cold and confident. "You think you can intimidate us? Your threats no longer work. We will not live in fear, and your control ends here." Shouts of approval echoed throughout the room. People began to rise from their seats, and the tension reached its breaking point. The CEO, sensing that his opponent was gaining more and more support, exhaled, trying to maintain the last of his control. "You don't understand that you are playing with fire. I know how this business works, and you can't just destroy it." "I'm not going to destroy it. I'm going to rebuild it," the billionaire said proudly. "It's going to be a place where everyone can work, where everyone can grow. It's not just about money, it's about people. You forgot about that, and now your days are numbered." The CEO hissed in anger, his face turning red. "You just don't understand what business is. I've put my life into this, and you're going to destroy it for your ideals?" "Ideals are what drives humanity forward," the billionaire replied, his voice growing stronger. "Your methods are outdated. The time for selfishness is over. We will work together or not at all. I do not fear your power. I fear what will happen if we allow you to continue." Arguments began in the hall. Some began to support the billionaire. Others were still hesitant, succumbing to the director's influence. He noticed this and with renewed fury attacked his opponents. "Are you all ready to follow him? The one who does not know what real work is. He is just a dreamer who leads you to ruin." But the billionaire wasn't about to give up. "You're a dreamer who lives in a world of fear. Fear is what you used to control us, but now we're letting go of it. We can build a business based on trust and respect, not threats and humiliation. I know I can do it with your support." The excitement in the room grew. People began to stand up, expressing their support. The CEO, realizing that his power was crumbling, tried to make a final move. "You all know that I am your boss. I can fire any of you who sides with this man. And by doing so, you will confirm your weakness," the billionaire shouted, unwilling to give in. "Every word you say only confirms that your power is based on fear. We will no longer be afraid of you." The room erupted in applause. Employees began to stand up, raising their hands in support. At that moment, the billionaire felt that his dream of equality and justice was beginning to take shape. The CEO, standing at the edge of his power, shouted, "I'm warning you, if you all leave, you won't be able to come back. I'll make you regret it." The billionaire, meeting his gaze, said with cold determination, "We have already made a choice, and that choice is to stand up for our rights and create a better future for everyone. Your time is up." The conflict had reached its peak, and everyone present understood that not only the fate of the company was being decided, but also their own fates. It was time for change, and no one was going to give in. The tension in the room was at its peak. Every word spoken by the billionaire and the CEO shook the atmosphere, like a harbinger of a storm. The billionaire's smile was confident, but his eyes showed a desire to change the world. The CEO, on the other hand, was full of anger and fear, and this only fueled his aggression. "Do you really think we are ready to obey? We are not your slaves to be treated like this," the billionaire shouted, addressing the crowd. "We are professionals who deserve respect, and your arrogance will no longer go unpunished." The CEO curled his lips, grinning. "You just don't understand how this world works. You're a black billionaire trying to fit into a world that wasn't meant for you. Your story is just an exception to the rule." These words pierced the atmosphere of the room, and those gathered froze, noticing the surprised looks. The billionaire did not leave it unanswered. Do you really believe that the color of my skin determines my abilities? This is your thinking that is the reason why we are here. We must fight the bias and racism that you represent. The CEO, still not believing that his words could cause such a reaction, began to get nervous. You want me to believe your fairy tale? You want me to believe that everyone is equal? In this world, unfortunately, it is not so. The billionaire stepped closer, his voice growing louder. We will never make progress with your approach. You think you can control us because you are in your comfort zone, but the world is changing, and if you are not willing to change, you do not belong here. The assembled group began to whisper, some whispering, "He's right." The CEO noticed this and, hysterically clenching his fists, shouted again, "You have no right to speak here. You have no right to lead. You are simply an example of how money can buy success, but not respect." The billionaire responded, "Your words are a reflection of your fear. Fear that you will lose power, that your methods will no longer work. I came here to show that even if I am black, I deserve to be here just like you, and I am not alone. There are many people here who are tired of your humiliation." The cheers rang out again, and the room began to notice that support for the billionaire was growing. The CEO, desperate to maintain control, shouted, "You are a temporary phenomenon. Your attempt to change our culture is nothing more than a rebellion without a purpose. A riot without a cause? You're missing the point." The billionaire responded, his voice filling with power. "This isn't just a fight for me. This is a fight for everyone who has ever experienced racism and prejudice. We're here to say enough is enough. Your methods, your humiliation, are not something we will tolerate." A moment of confusion and fear passed over the faces of those present. The CEO felt his words lose weight. He looked back at the assembled group, panic in his eyes. "If you continue to think like this, you will have to leave. I will not tolerate inappropriate behavior in my company. This is the kind of inappropriate behavior that needs to stop." The billionaire shouted, "You have no right to threaten people just because they are fighting for their dignity. We want to create a new standard, and that standard includes respect for everyone, regardless of skin color." The crowd began to make noise. Some began to rise, supporting the billionaire. He continued, "You thought you could control us with fear and prejudice, but it is your fear that controls you. It is time to break free from these shackles." The CEO, seeing his power crumbling, raised his voice sharply, "You can't force me to accept your rules. I will not tolerate your interference. You have no right to break into this culture and try to change it." The billionaire, unwilling to back down, clenched his fists but remained calm. "A culture that is based on bias has no future. We can create a more inclusive space for everyone, but to do this, you need to learn to accept people as they are, and not force them to fit your templates." The people in the room, increasingly aware of their power, began to loudly support the billionaire. The CEO, seeing his power slipping away, shouted again, "I'm warning you all, if you continue this outrage, you will regret it." "Regret what?" the billionaire replied, smiling, "That we took the side of truth? Do you think you can intimidate us? We've long since grown tired of being afraid." These words brought thunderous applause. At that moment, those gathered realized that they were part of something bigger, and the fear began to disappear. This was not just a meeting, it was a battle for their rights, for the opportunity to be heard. The CEO, alone against the majority, froze. He knew his time was running out, and his entire power was based on fear. The billionaire's words, filled with hope and determination, rang in his ears like an alarm, and he knew he could no longer control this situation. The crowd began to rally, and the billionaire saw their faces fill with courage. He raised his hands, calling for attention. "Let's change this company together. Let's create a new future where everyone feels like they belong here, no matter the color of their skin or where they come from." The CEO, in desperation, tried to speak again, but his voice had lost its power. He was no longer a leader. He had become a symbol of the old system that could no longer maintain control. A real revolution had begun in the room, and the billionaire was ready to lead all those who had ever suffered from injustice. The meeting degenerated into a heated clash of opinions as the CEO sensed that the situation was slipping out of control. His face turned red with anger and he exclaimed, "You are all just puppets in this game. You don't understand that the real world is cruel. Cruelty is what you use to control people." The billionaire replied, his voice becoming firm and confident, "You think fear is a way to maintain power? You are wrong. In fact, Fear only shows your weakness. The crowd began to murmur approvingly. Some began to rise, expressing their support for the billionaire. They were tired of being humiliated and prejudiced, and now they felt that they could be part of change. The CEO, realizing that his words were not having any effect, turned to the crowd. You all want to follow him? Someone who thinks he can just come in and change everything? You know that your dreams are just an illusion. The billionaire, seeing the discontent growing, responded with confidence. Your idea of the world is an illusion. We are tired of your system that burdens us with bias. We have the right to our dreams, and I am here to make those dreams a reality for everyone. The CEO, feeling his position becoming increasingly vulnerable, shouted again, these are not just dreams, these are dangerous ideas. You are jeopardizing the stability of the company and people's lives. Stability based on fear and oppression cannot be sustainable. The billionaire responded heatedly. You think your arrogance will make you untouchable? We are all here to show that your methods no longer work. The assembled people began to dance in a circle, raising their hands, shouting words of approval. Some began to applaud, and the atmosphere in the hall became more and more revolutionary. The CEO, unable to control the situation, said sharply, I see that you are ready to take extreme measures, but you do not understand that this will lead to chaos. Chaos is something you created when you chose to ignore the voices of the people. The billionaire shouted, we will no longer remain silent and give in to your threats. We demand respect and equality. The crowd continued to support him, and the CEO's anger grew with each passing second. He tried to find support among his supporters, but even those who had previously supported him began to waver. You are all just naive idealists. You don't know what real life is. He screamed in panic. The billionaire responded with warmth and determination. Real life is not about fear and oppression. It's about opportunity and support. We can build a company where everyone feels valued and heard. Your model is no longer relevant, and that's clear to anyone willing to see the truth. The CEO, realizing he was losing control, cried out sharply, you think you can just come in and change everything without knowing how much blood, sweat and tears went into it? I know what happened, and that's why I'm here. The billionaire responded, his voice filled with passion. I'm here to say that we will no longer tolerate humiliation. We don't just want to change the business, we want to change the culture based on respect and equality. The crowd began chanting, equality, respect, we demand change. The CEO, standing before the crowd, realized that his threat had lost its force. His methods were not working, and he finally felt that his time was running out. You will all realize that this is just a game, he cried in despair. You can lose everything you have. What do you have to lose? The billionaire asked. Your fear, your power based on oppression, that's what we need to get rid of to build a better future. The atmosphere in the room became tense. The CEO, desperate to reassert his authority, stepped forward. If you don't want to follow the rules, I won't leave you a choice. I'll fire you all. You'll fire yourself when you don't understand that people aren't afraid anymore. The billionaire replied firmly, we are a force, and you can't stop us. This isn't just about me or you, this is about everyone who has ever felt humiliated and unnoticed. The room erupted in cheers and applause, and the atmosphere became a storm of hope and determination. People who had felt like the weak link in the chain began to realize that they could be part of something bigger. The CEO, realizing that his power had collapsed, felt his words beginning to take on unreality. He was on the edge, and now he knew that his methods would no longer work. People were no longer willing to obey, and it was obvious. You have chosen a path, and I hope you are prepared for the consequences. He tried once again to intimidate the crowd, but his voice no longer sounded so convincing. We are ready for the consequences, and they are our own, the billionaire said loudly. We will fight for our freedom and for our right to be here, together, regardless of the color of our skin or our origin. The crowd began to applaud again, and at that moment it became clear that the conflict in the room was not just a clash between two personalities, but a battle for the future they all deserved. The room was full of emotions, fear, hope and determination intertwined in the air, creating an indescribable atmosphere. The CEO, realizing that he was losing not only control but also his self-respect, desperately tried to collect his thoughts. His last words no longer sounded threatening, more like a plea for support. You will all become part of this chaos, he shouted, almost hopelessly. You risk everything you have by following a dreamer. Dreamer or not, I am here to lead you to change, the billionaire retorted. We will no longer follow those who believe that fear and prejudice are the only way. That is the road to nowhere. People in the room began to rise and cheer loudly, and the atmosphere grew tense. They became increasingly confident in their abilities, realizing that together they could make a difference. The billionaire continued, trying to appeal to each of them. Each of you deserves better. We can build a company where everyone is respected, regardless of skin color, where everyone's opinions count. The CEO, sensing that his opponent was gaining more support, turned sharply to the crowd. You want to follow him without realizing that he is leading you to failure? He doesn't know how this business works. You are the one who doesn't know how to work with people, someone from the crowd responded. This was the signal for a wave of support. We are tired of your arrogance. The billionaire, seeing the support grow, was inspired. Together, we can create new standards. We can make this company a place where everyone feels valued, not humiliated. You know it's possible. The CEO, realizing that his threats were not working, got personal. You all forget who really rules here. Your dreams are just illusions. You believe that you can change the system, but this system has survived for centuries. A system based on fear and prejudice cannot be sustainable, the billionaire exclaimed again. Each of you has the right to a voice, to your dreams, and we will no longer remain silent. Shouts of approval filled the room again. The situation was heating up, and the billionaire continued, "It is time to expose your methods. Together, we must free ourselves from the stereotypes and limitations that hold us captive." The CEO, sensing his support was waning, tried to intimidate again. "If you follow him, you will have to face the consequences. You will be fired, you will not be able to find a job." "Is that all you have to threaten us with?" the billionaire replied with a smile. "We are not afraid. Fear will no longer stop us. We are entering a new era where everyone has the right to be here, where every opinion matters." People in the room began to unite, hugging each other, showing that they were ready for change. The atmosphere was filled with an energy that was impossible to ignore. The CEO, realizing that his power had finally been lost, stood like a frozen statue, his face expressing a mixture of rage and despair. "I won't let you do this," he finally cried, his voice hoarse with tension. "I'll make you regret your choice. You will regret this when you realize that you cannot govern people based on fear," the billionaire replied, his voice becoming loud and decisive. "We will fight for our rights and for our future, and no one will be able to stop us." At that moment, cries of support filled the room. People began to stand up, and many of them realized that they were part of something bigger than just a fight for a company. This was a fight for justice, for equality, and for the rights of each of them. The crowd began chanting, "We are the force. We are the change." The CEO, realizing that his power no longer mattered, froze, as if he had lost his meaning. He realized that he was losing not only control, but also his reputation. "You don't know what you're doing," he finally said, but his words sounded powerless. "You'll regret your actions." The billionaire, looking at the crowd, felt his heart fill with hope. He knew that they were now on the threshold of change, and nothing could stop them from moving forward. "We will not regret, we will be proud," he said, and his words became the beginning of a new era. The crowd responded wildly, and in that moment it became clear that they were part of a movement that would upend the system. Together, they were ready to fight for their rights and for a future of equality and respect. Loud applause rang out in the hall, and the crowd began to actively respond to the billionaire's words. People who had been silent or hesitant before now began to rise from their seats. Each of them understood that this was the moment they had been waiting for, an opportunity to express their opinions and show solidarity. Some began to hug, while others raised their hands in support, as if creating a wave of unity. Smiles and expressions of determination appeared on faces, and even those who had previously maintained a neutral position began to feel that they could change their fate. Voices began to rise from the crowd. "We are with you," one employee shouted, raising his fists in the air. Others chimed in, "We are for equality," and soon the room was filled with loud cries of support. Some began recording the scene on their phones, to document this historic moment. They knew something important was happening right here, right now, and they wanted to be a part of it. In other corners of the room, groups began to rise, discussing their thoughts and feelings, some exchanging looks of determination. The CEO, standing in the center of this chaos, noticed how some of his team, previously loyal to him, was now moving towards the billionaire. The unrest was growing, and he felt that his position was becoming increasingly vulnerable. This was clearly visible on the faces of people who were paying less and less attention to his threats. "You don't understand that your support will lead to nothing good," he tried to shout again, but his voice was lost in the general din. His words no longer had any power. At this time, the billionaire, seeing his support growing, began to interact more actively with the crowd. He addressed those who had previously remained silent. "What do you want from your work? What future do you want to build for yourself and for your children?" People began raising their hands, wanting to speak out. "We want respect," one woman shouted. "We want equality," a man standing nearby added. Each voice grew louder, giving strength to the others. Some of the staff began discussing what steps they could take to improve the situation. "Maybe we should form a working group to discuss these issues," one woman suggested, and others echoed her. The crowd began sharing ideas on how to improve working conditions and change the corporate culture. It was as if someone had broken the chains that had kept them in fear, and now they were full of enthusiasm and determination. The CEO watched this, desperately darting from side to side. He tried to get attention again, but his voice was drowned out by the billionaire's powerful wave of support. At that moment, it became clear that his authority had collapsed. "We will create a new culture," the billionaire continued, his words sounding like a hymn of hope. "A culture where everyone feels important, where every opinion is valued." The crowd began to chant, "We are a team, we are equal," and this phrase, spoken in unison, reflected their unity and strength. Some employees had already started approaching the billionaire, expressing their support. They hugged him, sincerely happy that they had found in him a leader who was ready to fight for their rights. The atmosphere in the hall was one of universal unity and the fight for justice. Each person understood that they were not just spectators, they were participants in a movement that was changing not only the company, but also their own lives. The crowd began to move toward the center of the room, forming a circle around the billionaire. He, in turn, realized that this moment was not only his personal victory, but also the beginning of a new era for all of them. Together, they became a force capable of breaking down the walls of prejudice and injustice. The CEO, finally realizing that his time was up, closed his eyes, his face contorted in despair. He could no longer intimidate people who had realized their strength and determination. At that moment, he realized that there was nothing he could do to change things except accept that things were changing, and that change was starting right here in this room. The crowd that had formed a circle around the billionaire continued to grow in strength. People, standing shoulder to shoulder, felt the electric energy in the air. Everyone understood that this was a historic moment, and none of them wanted to miss the opportunity to be part of change. "We demand dialogue," one of the women shouted, raising her hand. "We want our voices to be heard." The billionaire looked at everyone and nodded with understanding. "Dialogue is what we need. We can create a platform where everyone can speak out and be heard. This will be a step towards a new corporate culture based on respect and equality." People started discussing how exactly they could implement this idea. "Maybe we should organize regular meetings where everyone can share their thoughts," suggested one employee, "or create anonymous surveys so that even the most modest can speak out." Ideas poured out. They began to talk about the importance of being able to share ideas without fear of reprisals. They discussed creating committees that would include representatives from different departments to ensure that all opinions were heard. The CEO, standing to the side, felt the ground slipping from under him. He was no longer the center of attention, and his authority was slowly evaporating. He tried to intervene again. "Do you think this is possible? Do you really believe your ideas can work?" "Yes, we believe," came loud voices from the crowd. "We are ready to act." The billionaire, seeing support growing, said, "Each of you matters. Your ideas matter. We can create a team that will work on these changes, and I am ready to be your ally." At this point, the room erupted in applause. People were full of hope and enthusiasm. They began to discuss how exactly they could organize this team, how to establish dialogue and cooperation so that their voices could be heard at the highest level. The CEO, feeling that his situation had become hopeless, began to build up his anger. "You're all going to regret this. You don't know what you're doing here," he shouted, his voice full of despair. But the billionaire, ignoring his words, Continued, we must work together to break down the walls of prejudice and fear. This is not just a fight for our company, this is a fight for our rights and our future. Some of the employees began shouting out their ideas on how to improve the workplace environment. Let's have an open house, one employee suggested, so that everyone can come and share their opinions. Others supported her. Yes, this will create an atmosphere of trust and understanding. Each new step they discussed strengthened their unity. They began to realize that together they could create something more than just a workspace. It was a place where respect and equality would be the norm. The CEO, realizing that his words were no longer having any effect on the crowd, began to lose confidence. He looked at the billionaires, who seemed to be the only ones who stood by his side, but even they began to waver, seeing how the employees were becoming more united and confident. I'm warning you, you don't understand what's in store for you. He tried again, but his words were lost in the general din. Meanwhile, the billionaire, noticing the mood in the room growing, raised his hands. Let's schedule a meeting where we can discuss all the ideas and work out a plan of action. I am ready to meet with each of you and listen to your opinions. The crowd began to applaud again, and at that moment it became clear that they were ready to act. They realized that this was their chance to make a difference, and no one was going to give up. The crowd began to discuss how exactly to organize this meeting, and thoughts of the future filled them with inspiration. Every word, every sentence lifted their spirits. They felt that now they could really change not only their company, but their lives. The CEO, standing on the sidelines, began to realize that his time was up. The people who had once followed him were now looking for a new leader. He felt his power and authority crumbling, and panic was growing in his heart. The billionaire, seeing how his words inspired, finally overcame his fear. He understood that this was his moment, and now he was ready to lead everyone to change. We will fight for everyone to be heard. Together we will create a company based on trust and mutual understanding. And at that moment, when everyone started chanting, the atmosphere in the room changed. They weren't just fighting for their rights, they were creating a new future, full of opportunity and respect. Everyone in the room knew this was the beginning of something incredible, and they weren't going to stop. During the humiliation, the billionaire felt a whole range of emotions that intertwined and heated up, as if a fire was burning him from the inside. At first, he was overcome by a feeling of shock. He could not believe that he, a man who had achieved incredible success, was being humiliated in such a way in front of his colleagues. It was as if someone had pulled the ground out from under his feet, and he was standing on the edge of an abyss. Then came the anger. Every disparaging word from the CEO felt like a blow. He knew it wasn't just a personal attack, but a manifestation of deep-seated racism and bias. That anger gradually grew into determination. He knew he couldn't stand by and let these humiliations continue. Amidst all this emotional intensity, there was also a growing sense of vulnerability. Despite his status and achievements, he felt isolated at this moment, as if no one had his back. He saw some colleagues turn away or lower their eyes, and this increased his sense of loneliness. But at the same moment that his feelings reached their breaking point, a sense of power was also growing. He realized that he could use this moment as a catalyst for change, not just for himself, but for anyone who had ever felt humiliated or misunderstood. This feeling gave him confidence, and despite the humiliations, he became more determined to fight for equality and respect. His heart filled with hope. If he could overcome this humiliation, perhaps others could, too, and it was this thought that helped him stand firm against the pressure that was growing around him. The CEO felt his power slipping away. At the beginning of the meeting, he was confident, arrogant, and ready to crush anyone who dared to contradict him. He believed that his status and experience gave him an undeniable advantage. But as the billionaire's humiliation became clear, his confidence began to crumble. Every cheer from the crowd, every word of support directed at the billionaire seemed to erode his authority. He felt the walls he had built around himself begin to crumble. Fear and panic became his new companions. At first he tried to maintain control by making threats and provocations, but this only made things worse for him. He noticed that those who had previously obeyed him began to look at him with distrust and contempt. Every word he spoke sounded more and more unconvincing, and this made him angry. He knew his power was based on fear, but at that moment, when fear ceased to have an effect on others, he began to feel vulnerable. Instead of being a leader who led his subordinates, he suddenly found himself in the role of a man who was feared and despised. And this feeling of loss of control was terribly difficult. Thoughts arose in his head about what he could have done differently, how he could have avoided this situation, but nothing helped. He understood that all his methods were outdated, and this fact caused him deep despair. With each passing second, his power was slipping away, and he began to realize that he could no longer control the situation as he had before. He no longer had any influence over the people who seemed to be on the billionaire's side. This realization shocked him, and he felt himself losing not only his authority, but also himself in this fight that he had ignited. The conflict in the room reached its climax. The CEO, feeling his authority crumbling, glanced at the billionaire. His confidence was slowly turning into despair. He did not know how to regain control of the situation, and this made him furious. "You all don't understand where you're going," he shouted, his voice thick with anger. "This man is only using you. He has no interest in your well-being. He only wants to use you as pawns in his game." The crowd began to murmur, and the billionaire, without waiting for an answer, stepped forward again. "I'm here to work with you, not manipulate you. This is not a game, this is our life, our rights. We can change this company for the better." Some of the employees started chanting, "We're for him, we're for change." It was like adding fuel to the fire. The CEO felt panic creeping up on him. "You can't listen to him," he shouted again, his face red with tension. "He doesn't know how this business works. He has no experience, and you'll lose everything if you follow him." But the billionaire, feeling the power of support, just grinned. "I have the experience you lacked. I know how to build a team where every voice matters. We can create something amazing if we work together." The crowd began to react to his words, and this increased the tension in the room even more. "We want change. We want a voice," they chanted, creating a powerful chorus that drowned out all the CEO's attempts. The CEO, feeling that his words no longer carried weight, began to realize that his methods were no longer working. He turned sharply to his advisors, but they, too, had nothing to offer. He felt his loneliness growing, and the feeling became unbearable. At this point, the billionaire addressed the crowd again. "You who are here know that justice is more important than fear. We can change our future, and it starts with being heard. Each of you is a powerful force." The assembled crowd began to support him again, and the CEO, realizing that he was losing not only control but also his subordinates, decided to act abruptly. He raised his hand and shouted, "If you follow him, you will all lose your jobs." But this threat only caused laughter among those gathered. They began to look at him with bewilderment and contempt. One of the employees, daring, stepped forward. "We are not afraid anymore. We are ready to fight for our rights, and we will not allow you to intimidate us." The situation was getting more and more tense with each passing second. The CEO, realizing that he was losing support and power, no longer knew what to do. His voice began to shake and he felt his confidence fading. The billionaire, seeing that the turning point had arrived, addressed the crowd again. "We will take a step forward together. This is not just a fight for the company, this is our opportunity to change the world around us." His words resonated in the hearts of those gathered. They understood that they were not just being supported by a billionaire, they were becoming part of something bigger than themselves. Each of them felt that this was the moment when they could change their lives and the future of their company. The CEO, realizing that everything he was doing was against the will of his employees, began to retreat. He felt that he was losing not only his job, but also his identity. At this point, he was unable to control the situation, and his fear turned against him. The crowd, full of determination and unity, was ready to stand up against bias and injustice. Everyone felt that their voices finally mattered and they were ready to fight for their rights. At that moment, it became clear that the conflict would not end until equality and justice for all were achieved. The CEO, his power shattered, stood in the center of the room, frozen in his own fears. His threat had failed, and now he felt isolated, like a lost piece on a chessboard. Every look of contempt and determination from the assembled crowd made his heart beat faster. "You're all going to regret this," he shouted again, but his voice was no longer confident, like an echo from the distant past. In response, he saw some of the employees begin to stir, approaching the billionaire. The group wasn't going to be manipulated. Instead, they banded together, their eyes filled with determination. "We know what to do," one woman exclaimed, raising her hand. "We want to create a task force to make changes." The CEO, horrified that his plan had completely failed, tried to hang on stubbornly. He knew that if the staff actually took action, his days in office were over. But deep down, he felt that he was losing control not only of the situation, but of his career. The crowd began discussing how exactly they could implement their ideas. One of the employees suggested organizing a meeting where they could formulate their demands. This caused a storm of approval. Every word was supported by applause and shouts. The CEO, feeling his situation worsening, tried to reach out to some of the more loyal employees who had not yet deserted him. But even they began to show doubts, which only deepened his sense of isolation. Finally, the billionaire, realizing that the momentum was on his side, stepped closer to the CEO. His voice became calm and confident. "We are not going to give up. We want to work together, but if you continue to act this way, it will only be your loss. You can stay with us and help change the situation, or you can leave, the choice is yours." The billionaire's words sounded like a death sentence. The CEO suddenly realized that his time was running out. He could no longer manage the situation as he had before, and his authority had melted away like morning fog. This realization filled him with fear not only of losing his job, but of losing respect. I won't just leave," he said with forced confidence, but there was no strength left inside him. He felt his words losing weight, and in response to this, he saw some of the employees begin to move away from him, moving closer to the billionaire. The crowd continued to talk about change, and there was a fire of determination in their eyes. The CEO felt his influence fading with each passing minute. He stood on the edge of an abyss, unable to take a step forward or back. Finally, when one of the employees who had previously been on his side approached the billionaire and said, "We are for change. We are with you," the CEO realized that his time was up. He slowly retreated, his legs feeling heavy. He could no longer remain in this room where he was humiliated and despised. At that moment, he made the decision to leave the room. His face was contorted with despair and anger as he walked out the door, dejected, leaving behind a crowd full of hope and unity. As the CEO left the building, he felt his world crumbling. Anger and fear warred within him, but he also knew his methods were outdated. It might have been the end of his career, but a new understanding was beginning to dawn in his heart. Change was inevitable, and it had already begun. The crowd that remained in the room knew that this was a momentous occasion. They were ready to act, and no threats could stop them. They embraced, full of hope for the future they were going to build together. The CEO felt his strength draining away as he left the room. Each step toward the exit was heavy, as if he were stepping over the rubble of his lost power. He couldn't help but hear the noise of the crowd behind him, loud applause and cheers for the billionaire echoing through the hallways. It was like a blow to his ego, every sound a reminder of his defeat. As he walked out the door, he paused for a moment, trying to collect his thoughts. The wind playfully ruffled his hair, but inside he felt only cold and empty. The sky above him seemed gray, and this matched his inner state. He suddenly realized that all this brilliance and success he had achieved had lost its meaning for him. Outside, he saw several of his colleagues standing to the side, discussing what had happened. Their looks were full of surprise and condemnation, and he felt their displeasure. They made no attempt to hide their emotions, and this added to his shame. He remembered how they had once admired him, how they had sought his approval. Now they were witnessing his downfall. With each passing moment, the anger and resentment inside him grew. He realized that he could no longer manipulate his subordinates the way he once did. His fear of a future where he would no longer be in this position was beginning to take its toll on him. He thought about what he could do to regain his power, but quickly realized that his methods were no longer working. Suddenly, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from one of his advisors, asking what had happened. Looking at the screen only increased his inner turmoil. He didn't know how to explain the situation, how to justify his defeat. Instead of answering, he simply put the phone in his pocket, realizing that his life at work would never be the same again. Gathering his thoughts, he headed toward his car, which was parked in the lot. Every step was filled with disappointment. He remembered how he had recently been at the top, confident in himself and his influence. Now he was surrounded only by the ghosts of his past. He got into the car, closed the doors, and stared into space for a moment. Outside, the world kept moving forward, but for him, time stood still. He knew he had to rethink his priorities and his views on the people around him. Everything he knew about leadership was no longer relevant. Taking a deep breath, he started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot. As he drove, his thoughts swirled between anger, regret, and confusion. He knew he should take a step back, maybe even rethink his career, but the fear of the unknown kept him on edge. As he left behind a crowd full of determination and hope. They knew that changes lay ahead, and he was a shadow of the past that could no longer control their destiny. At that moment, despite his departure, a new energy was born in the room, an energy of change that would not stop. As the CEO left the room, the billionaire felt a surge of confidence and determination inside him. There was an air of unity and hope around him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He looked at his colleagues, who had just become part of something bigger than just corporate reform. This was a real fight for equality, respect, and a voice. It was as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He realized that he now had the opportunity to not just talk about change, but to be a catalyst for change. The CEO's departure symbolized a new beginning, and he felt that this was his chance to change not only the company, but also his own perception of the world. The billionaire knew his life would never be the same again. He thought of those who had suffered from prejudice and rejection, those who had no voice. Now he could be their voice, and this realization filled him with energy. He felt he had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to everyone who had ever felt humiliated or invisible. As his colleagues began to approach him, expressing support and willingness to work together, he felt a new connection being formed between them. They discussed ideas, proposals, and plans, and it filled him with hope. He saw how many of them, even those who had previously remained in the shadows, began to take initiative. Their voices were becoming heard, and this inspired him. Every minute he spent in the room reinforced his resolve. He knew there was a lot of work ahead, and he would face challenges, but now he had a team that believed in him and in their shared goal. This was more than just a corporate change. It was a movement that could impact the culture of the entire company. With it came the realization that his own path would change. 2. He was no longer just a billionaire with money and influence. He was a leader willing to take responsibility. This realization was not only burdensome, but also liberating. He knew that by opening himself to new ideas and voices, he was gaining more than he had ever had before, a sense of purpose and unity. As he left the room, his heart was filled with hope for the future. He knew that this day had become a turning point not only for him, but for everyone standing next to him. Together, they could create a company where everyone would be heard, and this was only the beginning of their journey. The billionaire walked out of the room, full of determination and new goals. The crowd that had once watched him humiliate now looked at him with respect and anticipation. He felt that on his shoulders lay not only the responsibility, but also a huge opportunity to change something meaningful. They gathered with their colleagues and began to formulate plans that could transform the company. Each proposal was enthusiastically received, and a sense of unity gradually grew. They organized meetings open to everyone, where everyone could express their ideas and opinions. It was an amazing time when the previously silenced voices of employees began to sound with force. As time went on, changes began to happen. The company began to implement new initiatives aimed at inclusion and equality. The billionaire became a symbol of this movement, and his story inspired many. People began to take pride in their work and actively participate in shaping the corporate culture. Meanwhile, the CEO's departure also became a topic of discussion in the media. His management methods were criticized, and he soon found himself at the center of a scandal. The billionaire, although not happy about it, understood that it was a necessary step to cleanse the company of its toxic atmosphere. With each success they achieved, the billionaire's confidence grew. He felt that he had finally found his place in the business world, where his ideas and efforts could make a difference. It wasn't just about power and money, it was about people, about helping them become better. A few months later, when one of the company's new initiatives was successfully launched, the billionaire gathered the team to celebrate their achievements. They gathered in the room where it all began, and now it was full of smiles and laughter. People who had once felt fear and distrust were now laughing and sharing their successes. Amidst this celebration, the billionaire raised his glass and gave a speech. "We did this together, and this is just the beginning. Our company will be a place where everyone is heard, where everyone can realize their potential. This is our time, and we will not stop." The applause filled the room, and he felt joy and pride well up inside him. This moment was symbolic not only for him, but for everyone standing around him. He knew there were many challenges ahead, but now they were ready to face them together. As the evening ended, The billionaire looked at his colleagues and felt that this journey was not just a fight for rights, but a journey of understanding that would change them all. He was filled with hope for the future, knowing that they could make this world a better place, not just for themselves, but for generations to come. When they came together, they realized that they had overcome not only corporate barriers, but also internal fears and prejudices. Each of them became part of something bigger, and this feeling of unity filled them with energy. The billionaire looked at his colleagues, the people with whom he had shared this journey. Their eyes shone with determination and hope for the future they were creating. In that moment, he realized that despite all the difficulties, they had found the strength to move forward. He turned to the window, his gaze gazing out into the distance, at the new horizons and possibilities that now lay before them. A certainty began to grow in his heart. They would be able to change not only their company, but the impact it would have on society as a whole. With this realization, the billionaire felt that his mission was just beginning. He knew that together with his team, they could achieve great things, and this would be their legacy. So, this journey led them to an important truth. Change is possible if there is unity and the will to act. They looked to the future with optimism, knowing that now their voices were heard and their efforts were not in vain. It was the end of one stage and the beginning of a new one, a time when each of them could realize their dreams and ideas in a world where justice and equality became the norm. Friends, we hope you enjoyed this story. We are very interested in what you think about it. Have you ever experienced racism in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion is really important to us. Remember that you are very, very important to us. We appreciate each of you and your support. If you like our content, don't forget to subscribe and like. This helps us grow and create more interesting stories. Have a nice day.